Human rights groups are sounding the alarm in Brazil. Nearly 4 women are murdered every day because of their gender. A jealous boyfriend or a hostile family member is often the killer. And the crime typically happens in the victim's own home. The government tried to fight back in 2015 with tougher prison sentences. But in a country of 200 million people, there are only 74 shelters for female victims of domestic violence. So what's Brazil's new president going to do about this problem? Well, let's ask Bolsonaro supporter and entrepreneur Julio Morais, who's also the CEO of the Public Administration Institute. With him is Flavia Carbonari, a violence prevention expert at the Brazil Forum for Public Safety, and Chayenne Polimedio, Deputy Director of the Political Reform Program at the nonpartisan think tank New America. I thank you all for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Flavia, let me begin with you. Is Brazil an especially violent place for women?
Yes, absolutely. Brazil is a very violent country in general. We have almost 65,000 murders per year. And just in 2017, the latest report from the Brazil Forum on Public Safety showed that 4,500 women were murdered. So it's a very violent country, especially for women. We had over 60,000 rapes reported. So this number could be much higher, given that this is one of the types of crime that has more underreporting. And we had over 220,000 reports of domestic violence. So it's a very, very dangerous country for women specifically, but it's a dangerous country in general.
So, Cheyenne, for those who might say, well, in a country or society with very high crime rates and a lot of violence, yes, sexual violence is going to be folded into it, but maybe women are not being specifically targeted above and beyond that. Does that argument hold any weight?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. I think it's hard to be able to determine whether or not women are being particularly targeted. It is fair to say that Brazilian society is very patriarchal. So women have always been treated as second-class citizens, and it's always been much harder for women to be taken seriously in various realms of life. So whether or not they're being targeted specifically, I don't know if we have data on that, but it is a fair assessment to say that it's harder for them, yes.
Julio Morais, why are so many women being killed every day in Brazil?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. I think the issue is more a cultural and educational issue than anything else. We have tough laws. I have to credit the previous administration. Lula passed the Maria da Penha law. Dilma has the upgrade on the rape law in 2009, and also created the Femicide law in 2015. But still, since 2007 to 2018, we have a growth, according to the United Nations, almost 30% of crime against women. So I think it's more like cultural and educational than like a big issue, like in a law or something else.
Okay. Flavia, laws have been passed. The Maria Penha law that was mentioned of 2006, the law in 2015 that was mentioned, which had special penalties for domestic violence and beyond, and femicide, if you like. Yet this still continues, right? So is Julio right that this is even deeper than any law can legislate for?
I think it is deeper. I would agree with that. I think cultural norms is a huge part of it. We know that it's a huge driver of violence against women. And in Brazil and Latin America and in general, that's why we have such high rates of violence against women. But there are also other factors. So other factors of gender inequality also weigh into this, because the less rights that women have, the less empowered that they are. Those are also drivers of violence against women. So it goes beyond, I think, just this patriarchal issues that we have in our society. but we have, we have less political representation. We have lower wages, less access to the labor market. So all these issues tend to make women more fragile in those situations and be more vulnerable to violence against them.
Yeah, Flavia.
But it's true that we have a strong legal framework.
Right. So, Flavia, with this new president, does it worry you that things will get worse?
I do worry. I think there are two main risks that I see. First, one very concrete related to a decree that was passed last month, loosening the access to arms. So I think that will put women in more dangers at homes. As you mentioned in the beginning of the show, actually half of the physical assault against women happen inside their homes, either by a partner, a parent, a stepfather. So if those people are able to have more access to arms, that will put women in more dangers. And several domestic violence survivors have spoken up against this measure. And I know that there's a discourse that people say that women could also benefit from having guns themselves to protect themselves. But that's very unlikely to happen. There's no evidence that shows that actually anyone having a gun at home will be safer, and let alone women if, half of their aggressors are inside their homes. So that's one thing that worries me. And the second, which I think is a broader issue, is related to the cultural norms that we're talking about in the beginning. So you can have stronger legislation to protect women that have already been victims. But if you don't work on the prevention side of it, these crimes will continue to happen. And when you have a discourse at the presidential level or during the campaign or at the ministry level that sort of emphasize some of the gender stereotypes that we had before and some sexist comments or misogynist comments, I think that can just reinforce the type of attitudes and social norms that we must change.
Okay, and Julio, I'm going to get a response from you in a minute, but I want to go to Chayenne first. Chayenne, do you agree with Flavia? Is she right to be concerned that some of these cultural norms are being exacerbated at the presidential level because of what the president has been saying on the campaign trail and since he took office?
Well, I think she's right to be concerned. I think that, the numbers don't lie in the sense that there's no real evidence that shows that having a gun at home makes one safer. I will say, however, though, that the narrative right now is very much skewed in the sense of the women who feel that they aren't going to be okay under this presidency and with, looser regulations around gun possession. But there is another counter narrative that's very powerful, that it's a lot of women who say that they actually feel safer. There's a lot of women who say, I am tired of walking around at night and being afraid that I'm going to be attacked, that I'm going to be raped because I don't feel safe. And a lot of what the new president has promised is to increase safety. So she's right in the sense that the numbers don't lie, but at the same time, a lot of people, including women in Brazil, have gotten to a point where they don't know what else to do. So this is sort of a last resort for them. And a lot of them are saying, if the government can't protect me, I might as well protect myself.
That's interesting because, yes, okay, I might be willing to tolerate a misogynist comment or two for as long as you keep the streets safe, which keeps me safe, which is a fascinating reality on the ground. Julio, to the issue of the comments. We have Flavia mention some of the comments at the presidential level. We've been through this before, right? Bolsonaro saying that woman's too ugly for me to rape. Bolsonaro talking about gay people in derogatory terms. And when we look at the statistics, for example, especially gay women are especially targeted. When we look at guns, to the point made earlier, more than 50% of women that have been killed with guns. Here's a president who's pro-gun and is not the biggest fan of being diplomatic when talking about women or talking about minorities within the LGBT group, for example. Can you understand why people are concerned that things are only going to get worse?
Yes, and I think it's too unfortunate because it's too early in his administration, so we can judge him. What he said during his campaign is fulfill the laws. We have way too many laws to protect women, the LGBT, but even though for the last 10 years, the number is still growing, drastically growing. So I think if he fulfill the laws that we already have in place, that will bring more security to LGBT and the women's group too. But let me go back a little bit on educational discuss that we have previous. We also have a growth on students attacking teachers and professors. I think they should start like that. If you're not disciplined and show respect to a student, prepare them to be men and women that will be patriots and respectful to other people, the problem can continue to grow for years. Let's take back like 10 years ago when Lula passed the Maria da Penha, which toughened the law, but the law is still, but the crime rate still growing. So what's the issue to this day? You know what I'm saying? Okay. I think the point is, if we get like, if a woman in LGBT community can be safe with the gun law, they can protect themselves against women. Because usually most of those criminals or
but the other argument, Julio, is to say that if somebody wants to shoot dead a woman, whether that be their girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, wife, whatever it might be, whatever the situation, it's made easier if guns are made more easily available, right? That's common logic.
Yes, I agree with you, but easy for them to protect themselves too. Women and LGBT community can also have guns too. They just need to apply and get granted to. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's easy for them to protect. So otherwise, I think a man will think twice before shoot a woman if you know the woman has a gun too. She can protect herself.
Okay, Flavia, do you buy that argument at all?
No, unfortunately, I don't. First of all, we all know that in order to be able to use a gun properly and defend yourself, that requires a lot of training. So I highly doubt that all the women, first of all, that will be able to access gun. Most of the women who are victims of violence in poor areas won't be able to access guns, and let alone training to be able to use it. So not only that, the fact that the gun might be found at home by their partners, for example, just may increase the risk of retaliation. So I think that's unfortunately that's not that wouldn't happen. And also, if I remember correctly, the latest survey that I saw on the support for this legislation in particular, that was back in December, done by Datafolha, it showed that 70% of women were not in favor of loosening gun restrictions in Brazil. Of course, everybody wants to feel safer and to be safer, and that's the platform that Bolsonaro ran that made him gain so many votes. But in this regard, specifically, I think, and the data shows that most women are not in favor of that, and they do think that they could be more vulnerable at their own homes also.
Yeah, this makes me want to have a gun control topic on Brazil, a specific segment on this in the future, because this is a fascinating debate in Brazil. I'm South African. I grew up in South Africa, and the debate is very similar, especially in a country with high crime rates. A lot of people are for it. A lot of people are against it. And they make compelling arguments both ways. Cheyenne, I want to talk about the issue of retaliation because it was brought up by Flavia here. We've got the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. In their report, the Commission noted with concern that in most cases, the murdered women had previously denounced their aggressors, faced serious acts of domestic violence, or suffered previous attacks or attempted homicides, right? So is the lesson here that if you speak out, it makes you more of a target and you could end up dead?
Yes, it's a failure of the system. We read every other day in Brazilian media a story about a woman who was murdered, who had sought some sort of help from the authorities, who denounced her aggressor, who said, "I don't feel safe," and yet none of the precautionary measures were taken to make sure that she felt safe, that she was protected, or that the aggressor was put behind bars. So it's a failure of the system. A lot of things go into that. One of them is just a lack of capacity. So we have these specific stations, police stations around the country that are focused on women so that women feel safer going there and filing a complaint. There aren't enough of those. It's also a failure of a cultural failure, women not feeling safe in terms of really going to the authorities and telling them what's going on and making sure that what is happening to them is known. But it's also a failure of the law, right? If you go up there and you make a complaint about your aggressor, you shouldn't have to make a complaint 3-4 times for you to be taken seriously. You should be taken seriously on the first time. So there are a lot of things going into it that create just an overall failure that makes us see all these cases happening, even though women did try to make them stop.
Okay, well, it's been an important conversation to have, and I thank you all for taking the time. Julio, Flavia, and Cheyenne, thanks so much for joining us here on the Newsmakers.